Contemporary global governance.
The world is increasingly complex and interconnected. International agreement and collective action are needed more than ever before.
Global governance sounds like a really big topic, and it really is. It's where we try to bring the world together to solve the big problems of our time.
Be it biodiversity, be it water and watersheds that span various countries, the fishing in the areas beyond national jurisdiction, health issues for infectious diseases that spread borders.
It's where problems that can't be solved anywhere else at national level, at regional level, need to be discussed and coordinated among all countries. Global governance is not setting up a different government. It's making the governments that we have work better together.
Countries sometimes complain that these processes take many years, sometimes decades, to come to an agreement. But still, it's much more efficient than everybody negotiating with everybody on every tiny little bit.
We have a very important principle. We call it the multilateral principle. Every country really has one vote.
It's very inclusive because in the UN system, every country has the same right to speak. And therefore, the weaker countries have a chance to get included in the process and have their voices heard.
It gives the small island developing states, for example, who are most exposed to the ravages of climate change, who could be literally made to vanish. It gives them the strongest position to dialogue with the other nations who have the capacity to really change our response to climate.
Because the world is so complex, we have to take this bull at the horn and really work together and really bring everybody on board to get the solution to these problems.
And to have an inclusive solution will take long. It will be more tedious, but I think we'll get to a solution that everyone can support.
Introduction. Global governance encompasses activity at international and regional levels and refers to activities in the public and private sectors that transcend national boundaries. Global governance brings together diverse actors to coordinate collective action at the level of the planet. The goal of global governance, roughly defined, is to provide global public goods, particularly peace and security, justice and mediation systems for conflict, functioning markets and unified standards for trade and industry. United Nations. The name United Nations which was coined by then the United States President Franklin D. Roosevelt, was first used in the Declaration by the UN of January 1, 1942 during World War II. The UN is an international organization founded in 1945. The UN is an intergovernmental organization that is tasked to promote international cooperation and create and maintain international order. Role of the UN. Due to the powers vested in its charter and its unique international character, the UN can take action on the issues confronting humanity in the 21st century, such as peace and security, climate change, sustainable development, human rights, disarmament, terrorism, humanitarian and health emergencies, gender equality, governance, food production. Some of the roles of the UN are the following: maintain international peace and security, The UN came into being in 1945, following the devastation World War II, with one central mission, that is, the maintenance of international peace and security. The UN does this by working to prevent conflict, helping parties in conflict make peace, peacekeeping, and creating the conditions to allow peace to hold and flourish. These activities often overlap and should reinforce one another to be effective. The UN Security Council has the primary responsibility for international peace and security. The General Assembly and the Secretary-General play major, important, and complementary roles, along with other UN offices and bodies. Protect human rights. The term human rights was mentioned 7 times in the UN's founding charter, making the promotion and protection of human rights a key purpose and guiding principle of the organization. In 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights brought human rights into the realm of international law. Since then, the UN has diligently protected human rights through legal instruments and on-the-ground activities. Deliver humanitarian aid. One of the purposes of the UN, as stated in its charter, is to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character. The UN first did this in the aftermath of World War II on the devastated continent of Europe, which it helped to rebuild. The UN is now being relied upon by the international community to coordinate humanitarian relief operations due to natural and man-made disasters in areas relief capacity. Promote sustainable development. From the start in 1945, one of the main priorities of the UN was to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character and in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. Improving people's well-being continues to be one of the main focuses of the UN. The global understanding of development has changed over the years, and countries now have agreed that sustainable development, which promotes prosperity and economic opportunity, greater social well-being, and protection of the environment, offers the best path forward for improving the lives of people everywhere. Uphold international law. The UN Charter, in its preamble, set an objective, that is, to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. Since then, the development of and respect for international law has been a key part of the work of the UN. This work is carried out in many ways, that is, by courts, tribunals, and multilateral treaties, and by the Security Council, which can approve peacekeeping missions, impose sanctions, or authorize the use of force when a threat to international peace and security exists. If it is deemed necessary, these powers are given to the organization by the UN Charter, which is considered an international treaty. It is an instrument of international law, and the UN member states are bound by it. The UN Charter codifies the major principles of international relations, from sovereign equality of the states to the prohibition of the use of force in international relations. United Nations system agencies include the World Food Programme, UNESCO, and UNICEF. The UN's most prominent officer is the Secretary-General, which is an office held by Portuguese politician and diplomat Antonio Guterres since 2017. Non-governmental organizations may be granted consultative status with the Economic and Social Council ECOSOC and other agencies to participate in the UN's work. 6 principal organs of UN. 1. General Assembly. The General Assembly, which is the main deliberative assembly, is the main policy-making and representative organ of the UN. All 193 member states of the UN are represented in the General Assembly, thereby making it the only UN body with universal representation. Each year, in September, the entire UN membership meets in the General Assembly Hall in New York for the annual General Assembly session and a general debate, which many heads of state attend and address. Decisions on important questions, such as those on peace and security, admission of new members, and budgetary matters, require a 2/3 majority of the General Assembly. Decisions on other questions are by a simple majority. The General Assembly elects a president each year to serve a one-year term of office. 2. The Security Council under the UN Charter. The Security Council, for deciding certain resolutions for peace and security, has primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. It has 15 members, 5 permanent and 10 non-permanent members. Each member has 1 vote under the Charter. All member states are obligated to comply with the decisions of the Council. The Security Council takes the lead in determining the existence of a threat to the peace or act of aggression. It calls upon the parties to a dispute to settle it by peaceful means and recommends methods of adjustment or terms of the settlement. In several cases, the Security Council can resort to imposing sanctions or even authorize the use of force to maintain or restore international peace and security. The Security Council has a presidency, which rotates and changes every month. 3. Economic and Social Council. The ECOSOC, for promoting international economic and social cooperation and development, is the principal body for coordination, policy review, policy dialogue, and recommendations on economic, social, and environmental issues, as well as the implementation of internationally agreed with development goals. It serves as the central mechanism for the activities of the UN system and its specialized agencies in the economic, social, and environmental fields, thereby supervising subsidiary and expert bodies. It has 54 members that are elected by the General Assembly for overlapping 3-year terms. It is the UN's central platform for reflection, debate, and innovative thinking on sustainable development. 4. The Secretariat. The Secretariat, for providing studies, information, and facilities needed by the UN, comprises the Secretary General and tens of thousands of international UN staff members who carry out the day-to-day work of the UN as mandated by the General Assembly and the organization's other principal organs. The Secretary General is the Chief Administrative Officer of the UN, who was appointed by the General Assembly on the recommendation of the Security Council for a 5-year, renewable term. UN staff members are recruited internationally and locally and work in duty stations and on peacekeeping missions worldwide. Serving the cause of peace in a violent world is a dangerous occupation. Since the founding of the UN, hundreds of brave men and women have given their lives in its service. 5. The International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice, the primary judicial organ, is the principal judicial organ of the UN. Its seat is at the Peace Palace in The Hague, Netherlands. It is the only one of the 6 principal organs of the UN that are not located in New York, United States of America. The court's role is to settle, following international law, legal disputes submitted to it by states and to give advisory opinions on legal questions referred to it by authorized UN organs and specialized agencies. 6. Trusteeship Council. The Trusteeship Council, inactive since 1994, was established in 1945 by the UN Charter under Chapter 13 to provide international supervision for 11 trust territories that had been placed under the administration of 7 member states and ensure that adequate steps were taken to prepare the territories for self-government and independence. By 1994, all trust territories had attained self-government or independence. The Trusteeship Council suspended operation on November 1, 1994. By a resolution adopted on May 25, 1994, the Council amended its rules of procedure to drop the obligation to meet annually and agreed to meet as occasion required by its decision, the decision of its president, or at the request of a majority of its members or the General Assembly or the Security Council. Before we move on to our next topic, let us watch and know WHAT the function of United Nations is.
Understanding the United Nations is key to understanding international politics. For one, many of the most controversial conflicts in recent history can be partly traced to actions sanctioned by the UN. For example, the Israeli-Palestine conflict materialized due to a UN partition of Palestine, and in the 1950s, the United Nations approved of a US-led intervention in the Korean War. So how exactly does the United Nations work? Well, the whole purpose of the UN is to promote cooperation between nation-states. As of 2016, there are 193 members. Notable non-members include Taiwan, Kosovo, and Palestine, which is recognized as an observer state. The structure of the United Nations is laid out in its founding document, the United Nations Charter. This document describes the process for legislative, judicial, and executive processes. Primarily, decisions are controlled by the United Nations system, which is composed of 6 principal organs and various specialized agencies. The General Assembly is the main legislative branch, and all member states have equal representation within it. Meetings of the General Assembly usually focus on resolutions, which are non-binding recommendations, which at least 50% of the United Nations members recognize as important to international affairs. The General Assembly also controls the budget, and in doing so will decide how much each member is compelled to spend to keep the organization alive. The controversial aspect of the General Assembly is a consequence of the equal representation. This one state, one vote system potentially allows a resolution to pass with 2/3 support by nations that only comprise 5% of the world population. The Security Council is possibly the most controversial of the 6 organs, however, and for a good reason. This organ oversees international security matters, including peacekeeping operations and United Nations membership. There are 5 permanent members of the Council, for reasons that I went over in this video, but there are also 10 non-permanent members who are voted on by the aforementioned General Assembly. Unlike the decisions made by the General Assembly, Security Council resolutions are meant to compel military action from its members. Relatively recently, however, the Security Council failed to authorize the United States invasion of Iraq, calling into question the effectiveness of its binding agreements. The administrative work of the United Nations is done by its Secretariat. The Secretariat is responsible for the drafting of official documents and preparing the budget voted on by the General Assembly. The head of the Secretariat is the Secretary General, who acts as a de facto spokesperson for the United Nations. At the time this video is published, the Secretary General is Ban Ki-moon from South Korea. The International Court of Justice is the primary judicial body of the United Nations. It settles disputes between members that have recognized its authority on the matters. If a member refuses to recognize the authority of the court, the matter may be brought to the Security Council. The court is composed of 15 judges trained in international law and voted in by the General Assembly. The Trusteeship Council is a principal organ but has been inactive since 1994. It was responsible for preparing trust territories, or countries that were formerly under the control of sovereign colonialists, for proper entry into the community of independent states. After Palau became independent, the body was declared extinct indefinitely. Finally, the Economic and Social Council decides how best to coordinate the United Nations specialized agencies. The specialized agencies carry out actions not normally associated with any other organ and are centrally focused on the development and expansion of trade, economic growth, and social unity. The Economic and Social Council holds 54 members and is led by a president voted in for a 1-year term. Among the specialized agencies include the International Monetary Fund, which promotes economic prosperity, and the World Health Organization, which aims to reduce infectious disease. In addition, the Food and Agriculture Organization has a goal to defeat hunger worldwide. In 1990, nearly 1 in 5 people worldwide were undernourished. Now that number is less than 1 in 9. And while we can't say that the United Nations is completely to thank for this drastic reduction in hunger, its continuing mission to strengthen ties with countries and break down barriers between people certainly hasn't made hunger worse. Thanks for watching, and check out our other videos.
Functions of the UN. Similar to its function in the past, the main function of the UN today is to maintain peace and security for all of its member states. Although the UN does not maintain its military, it does have peacekeeping forces that are supplied by its member states. On the approval of the UN Security Council, these peacekeepers are sent to regions where armed conflict has recently ended to discourage combatants from resuming fighting. In addition to maintaining peace, the UN aims to protect human rights and provide humanitarian assistance when needed. In 1948, the General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a standard for its human rights operations. The UN currently provides technical assistance in elections, helps improve judicial structures and draft constitutions, train human rights officials, and provides food, drinking water, shelter, and other humanitarian services to peoples displaced by famine, war, and natural disaster. Finally, the UN plays an integral part in social and economic developments through its UN Development Program. This is the largest source of technical grant assistance in the world. The World Health Organization on AIDS, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria, the UN Population Fund, and the World Bank Group also play essential roles in this aspect of the UN. The parent organization also annually publishes the Human Development Index to rank countries in terms of poverty, literacy, education, and life expectancy. Global governance in the 21st century. Global governance was developed to explain an international system that was becoming increasingly complex. It refers to the loose framework of global regulation, both institutional and normative, that constrains conduct. It has many elements: international organizations and law, transnational organizations and frameworks, elements of global civil society, and shared normative principles. It refers to the institutions, organizations, laws or principles, agreements, and treaties and codes of conduct in the international system that control or limit the conduct of processes, flows, interactions, and actions or behaviors of actors in the international system. This international system does not have a global government that exerts authority or implements laws that members in the international system, states, or private organizations and individuals obey. Challenges of the global governance in the 21st century. Environmental challenges in the scientific community. The major areas of urgent concern are climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. For example, the global carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels have grown at an average annual rate of 2% since 1990 and hit record levels in 2018, thereby reflecting the continued growth. The global economy. A considerable increase in energy consumption was observed in China, accompanied by the weakening of natural carbon sinks, such as forests and seas. Large volumes of the Arctic ice have melted and accelerated flow in Greenland glaciers and is contributing to rising sea levels at present. Social challenges. Unemployment is one of our most important social challenges because it drives exclusion and marginalization, with consequences including increasing crime, drug trafficking and use, juvenile delinquency, family breakdown, domestic violence, and migration in search of better opportunities. Meaningful employment is essential for human dignity and a place in the community, and work in a spirit of service to the community has important benefits, including refining human character and empowering individuals to develop their human potential. No one should be deprived of the opportunity to work, and one purpose of good governance should be to guarantee this opportunity. Neither governments nor private actors have found a solution to this challenge at present. Some have proposed a guaranteed minimum income. While this can be an effective tool to alleviate poverty and provide a safety net for vulnerable groups, it does not address the problem of unemployment and the associated waste of resources. Work is necessary for individual and social health. Economic challenges. One economic challenge is the growing risk of a global financial collapse when the present debt bubble bursts. The global economy has no lender of last resort. No reliable, depoliticized mechanism can deal with a financial crisis at present. Whether a country receives or is refused an International Monetary Fund (IMF) bailout in the middle of a financial meltdown is a function not of a transparent set of internationally agreed rules but of several other factors, including whether the IMF's largest shareholders consider the country to be a strategic ally worth supporting. No effective international legal framework exists to ensure that global business enterprises are socially, environmentally, and economically responsible. Security challenges the global economy has never had higher levels of productive capacity, and average life expectancy is at an all-time high. Hence, the potential costs of global war are also at an all-time high. The rewards of war among states, that is, loot, land, glory, and honor, which for many centuries propelled nations to war, have given way to populations in search of growing prosperity, social security, and various forms of protection. Military conscription is on its way out in most countries and is no longer regarded as an obligation of citizenship. In many parts of the world, war is seen as a form of criminal enterprise. Global governance according to Adil Nayam.
The governance system that has evolved over time is broke, is inefficient, and it has emerged like that for a reason. And that reason is that it has emerged in this sort of haphazard fashion. So, right, I need, this is an issue I want to focus on now, let's make an institution here. Here is an issue we need to do something about, let's make a treaty here. So it's come up sort of by itself without these connections being made. But it's like herding a cat. Governing the environment is like herding a cat because there are too many actors. Each operates on their interests. Each assumes that their interests are different from the others, and they're going all over the place. So if you're developing countries, you have very different interests from if you're middle income countries, very different interests from if you're high income countries, very different interests if you're a business in a developing country than if you're a business in an industrialized country, so on and so forth. The diversity of actors, which is in many ways a good thing, makes the process of management of these actors very different. And that is one reason why you can't really have a one-size-fits-all system and a czar with a whip herding cats. If you really want to herd cats, be nice to them. Figure out what tidbits they want. Give them the incentive to stick together, because they're not going to be whipped into compliance like other species might be. So that's the lesson there. But if I might, I do want to say, sort of, if you look at the story of how global environmental governance has evolved, in some ways I think it's also an inspiring story. So if you look back at 1972, when leaders of the world gathered in Stockholm, or even at the Brundtland Report, I would posit that they could never have imagined that we would have today a system as elaborate, with as much money, with as many actors, taken as seriously, at least in the rhetoric, as we do. So in some ways the system has grown too fast, beyond our imagination. I have small kids, and they have this habit of growing up every year. And that means they grow out of their clothes. So either I can go and shout at them for growing up, or I can get them new clothes. That's the challenge of global environmental governance. It has grown too fast, and the system that we had created back in the 1970s no longer fits either the dimension of the problems or the dimensions of our aspirations. Environment is the perfect example. Environment has multiple issues. So we need to deal with biodiversity. We need to deal with climate change. We understand that we need to deal with them separately, but the two are connected. What happens to climate change will impact biodiversity. Similarly, those who deal with governance of biodiversity need to interact with those who deal with governance of climate change, and it goes on and on and on. Even more importantly, those who deal with how we govern financial flows make a lot of the rules that impact the environment. So they need to figure out the governance of the environment. Those who deal with business, a lot of really what happens in the environment is affected by actors who are not purely quote-unquote environmental. And that's why we need a governance system rather than one super organization of the environment that's going to manage everything perfectly. I think the issue of global governance in general and global environmental governance in particular is central to where we go in the future. You simply cannot bring about the type of transformational change that the world needs in the environmental arena without also transforming the systems of governance that are going to implement that change.
Relevance of state amid globalization. The role of the state in globalization is a complex one, in part due to the varying definitions and shifting concepts of globalization. While it has been defined in many ways, globalization is generally recognized as the fading or complete disappearance of economic, social, and cultural borders between nation-states. Several scholars have theorized that nation-states that are inherently divided by physical and economic boundaries will be less relevant in a globalized world, while increasingly reduced barriers regarding international commerce and communication are occasionally seen as a potential threat to nation-states. These trends have existed throughout history. Globalization has changed the role of the state politically because of strengthened interstate relationships and dependence on one another. States were created to be sovereign. The state role has changed because most states now have a high dependence on others. Britain cannot govern and act as a state independently of the USA's influence and relationship.